Friend the silent investor. My name is Renata Voss. I'm 36. 4 months ago, I drove 3 hours to the reopening of my father's restaurant, the restaurant I had personally saved from foreclosure 11 months earlier. When I got to the door, my stepmother stood in front of it with her arms crossed and told me the event was invite only. My father stood behind her and said nothing. I was still holding the bottle of wine I'd chosen specifically because it was the same vintage my father, and I used to split on slow Tuesday nights when I bussed tables there as a teenager. 3 weeks later, my stepmother called, not to apologize. She called about a wire transfer that hadn't gone through, and what I told her, she was not prepared for. Before I get into it, if you're the type who likes stories about people finally saying enough, go ahead and hit subscribe, but only if you're actually planning to stick around for more of these. And if you feel like it, drop your city and what time it is where you are. I like picturing where everyone's listening from while they do dishes or drive home. Let me take you back to last spring. It was a Sunday afternoon in April when my father called me. Warren Voss doesn't call often. He's a man who communicates in short, practical sentences, usually about weather or the price of propane. So when his name lit up my phone on a weekend, I already knew it wasn't small talk. "Renata," he said. "The restaurant's in trouble." The restaurant was Voss and Daughter, a 22-seat Italian place my father opened the year I turned 9. Back when it was just the two of us most nights, because my mother had left and never really came back into the picture. I grew up in that kitchen. I learned to fold napkins into fans before I learned long division. The name on the awning wasn't sentimental branding. It was literal. I was the daughter. By the time my father called that Sunday, he'd been remarried to Corinne for 6 years, and the restaurant had 2 more names on the deed that weren't mine. Corinne's twin sons from her first marriage, Dax and Tobias, both in their mid-20s, neither of whom had ever worked a single shift there. "How much trouble?" I asked. The health inspector shut down the walk-in. Compressors dead, roofs leaking into the dining room. Banks threatening to call the loan. He paused. "I need $60,000 or I lose it." I sat with that number for a long moment. $60,000. I do UX consulting for mid-size fintech firms in Seattle. I'd had a good few years. I had the money sitting in a brokerage account doing nothing in particular. "I can wire it this week?" I said. "I'll pay you back." "I know, Dad." He didn't ask me to be part of the decision-making. He didn't ask if I wanted equity, or a formal loan agreement, or even a thank-you dinner. He asked for money. The way he always had. In the specific and narrow way people ask you for things, when they've learned over the years that you'll say yes without making it complicated. And I said yes, the way I always had, because some part of me still believed that if I kept saying yes long enough, eventually I'd stop being the daughter who left for Seattle at 18, and start being the daughter who mattered. I wired the $60,000 on a Tuesday. New walk-in cooler installed within 2 weeks. Roof patched. Bank loan brought current. I didn't ask for paperwork beyond a basic promissory note my father emailed me. Unsigned by a lawyer, just 2 paragraphs and his signature scanned from his phone. I signed my half and sent it back without reading it twice. I told myself that's what family does. Over the next several months, I watched the restaurant's second life unfold entirely through Instagram. Corinne had taken over the page. New logo, new color scheme. Sage green instead of the deep red my father and I had picked out of a paint chip book at the hardware store when I was 11. Posts about whore boys. Dax handling the new cocktail program, Tobias doing front of house design. Never a single mention of the money. Never a mention of me. I texted my father to ask when the grand reopening would be. He said he'd let me know. 3 weeks passed. I asked again. He said Corinne was handling the guest list and it was getting complicated with capacity. I told myself that was reasonable. Restaurants have fire codes. Small dining rooms have limits. Then 10 days before the reopening, Corinne posted a flyer. A family legacy reimagined. Underneath it, a photo of my father, Corinne, Dax, and Tobias standing in front of the restored dining room, all 4 of them in matching sage green aprons, arms around each other, captioned, "The 4 of us built this back from nothing. So proud of my family. Built this back from nothing." I read that caption on my phone at my desk in Seattle and felt something in my chest go very still. I hadn't been asked to be in the photo. I hadn't been mentioned in the caption. The $60,000 that made the photo possible didn't exist anywhere in that sentence. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe Corinne just wasn't thinking about it. Maybe my father would say something at the actual event. Maybe I was building a resentment out of one careless Instagram caption. I booked a hotel 40 minutes from the restaurant, requested the Friday off work, and drove down for the reopening, wine in hand, telling myself the caption didn't matter as much as showing up would. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever known, somewhere underneath the hope, that you were about to be disappointed, and gone anyway because some part of you needed to see it happen with your own eyes rather than just imagine it? Tell me in the comments if that's ever been you. It was me, that whole drive down. The restaurant sat on the corner of a street I'd known my entire life, but it looked different now. New signage, string lights, a small crowd already gathered on the sidewalk in cocktail attire. Through the window I could see the dining room, warmly lit, my father's old brick wall exposed and restored, servers in black aprons, not sage green. Apparently that had been for the photo only, moving between tables with trays of Prosecco. I parked 2 blocks away because the lot was full, and walked up holding the wine bottle against my chest like something fragile. Corinne was at the door with a clipboard, greeting people by name, kissing cheeks, laughing at something a man in a blazer had said. When she saw me, her face did a specific thing, a flicker, a recalibration, and then a smile that didn't move past her mouth. "Renata," she said. "I didn't realize you were coming. I texted Dad I'd be here. This is a private event tonight, honey. Investors, press, a few close friends. We're doing a public open house next month. I can put you on that list." I stood there holding the wine. "I put $60,000 into this restaurant, Corinne. I know, and we're so grateful. But tonight is really about introducing the new concept, and it's already tight on capacity." She glanced past me at the next guest arriving. "I really do have to greet people." My father appeared behind her in the doorway. He looked at me, he looked at Corinne. He said nothing. He turned and refilled someone's champagne glass instead. That was the moment I understood something wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision, and it had been made without me a long time before that sidewalk. I set the wine bottle down on the little iron table by the entrance, next to a stack of press kits with the new logo on them, and I said, "Enjoy your evening," in a voice that came out steadier than I felt. Then I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't cry until I was inside it with the doors locked. Through the windshield I could see the golden light of the dining room, hear the faint sound of a jazz trio someone had hired, watch shapes moving past the window, laughing, toasting, none of them me. I drove back to the hotel. I didn't sleep much. Instead I opened my laptop and pulled up the promissory note my father had emailed me back in April, the one I'd signed without reading closely. The terms were vague, which I now understood was the point. No fixed repayment schedule, no interest specified, no collateral named. Just a sentence acknowledging a loan of $60,000 from Renata Voss to Warren Voss, to be repaid. As the business allows. As the business allows. I read that phrase 4 or 5 times. A loan with no enforceable terms is, functionally, a gift the borrower hasn't decided to call a gift yet. I had wired $60,000 into a legal structure that, on paper, gave me almost nothing beyond my father's word. And I already knew tonight exactly how much his word protected me at a door with a clipboard. I didn't sleep. Around 1 a.m., I found the LLC filing for the restaurant, easily searchable through the state's business registry, since Corinne had restructured ownership when the new walk-in went in. Voss & Daughter Hospitality LLC. Members listed: Warren Voss, Corinne Voss, Dax Bell, Tobias Bell. 4 names, not 5. I had funded the survival of a business I held 0 legal stake in, under a family name I'd been standing next to for 22 years. And I wasn't even a footnote in its ownership structure. I want to ask you something, because I thought about this a lot that night. If you found out the thing you sacrificed for legally belonged to everyone except you, what would you do first? Would you call and demand answers? Or would you go quiet and start reading the paperwork? Drop your answer below. I went quiet. I think that's the more dangerous option, honestly, and I don't say that lightly. The next morning, I called my cousin Elise, who's a contracts attorney in Portland and has never in her life minced words with me. "Send me the note," she said. "And the LLC filing." I did. She called back within the hour. "This note is barely enforceable as written, but it's not worthless. There's a signed acknowledgement of debt. Depending on your state, you likely have grounds to convert this into a formal demand for repayment with interest, on a set schedule, and if he doesn't pay, you can pursue it as an unsecured personal loan against him individually. Not the LLC. Since the money went to him before the restructuring, not to the entity. Meaning, Meaning the 60,000 isn't legally the restaurant's problem to fix. It's your father's personal debt to you. He can't hide behind Corinne's LLC. He owes you personally, regardless of what he decided to call the restaurant's ownership afterward. I sat with that for a long moment. I wasn't interested in destroying the restaurant. I'd loved that place since I was 9 years old. But I was no longer interested in pretending that love obligated me to keep financing people who'd decided, on paper and at the literal door, that I wasn't part of the family that mattered. Draft the demand letter, I told Elise. 30-day formal repayment schedule, standard interest. Send it to him directly, not to the LLC. 3 days later, the letter went out. I didn't send an angry text, I didn't post anything. I went back to work in Seattle and let the certified mail do the talking. My phone rang 2 days after that. Corinne, not my father. Renata, what is this? A lawyer's letter, over family money. It's a loan, Corinne. It was always a loan. I have the paperwork. We can't pull $60,000 out of the business right now, you know that. We just reopened. That's between you and my father. My agreement was with him personally, not with the LLC you and your sons are members of. A pause, sharper this time. You weren't even supposed to know about the LLC. There it was, not a denial. A confession disguised as an accident. I know all of it now, I said. The ownership, the reopening, the photo. All of it. You're being incredibly petty about a party. I'm being incredibly precise about a debt. Those are different things. She hung up on me, which I was starting to notice was the family's signature move whenever a conversation reached a sentence they didn't have a script for. My father called that evening. His voice was quieter than I'd heard it in years. Renata. Do you have to do this through a lawyer? I tried to do it through a door, Dad. Corinne had a clipboard. Silence. That was a mistake, he finally said. The capacity thing. I should have said something. You did say something. You said nothing. In front of me, while she turned me away. That was the something. He didn't have an answer for that. Fathers who spent 30 years avoiding conflict rarely do. In my experience, they've built entire lives around not being the one who has to say the hard thing, which means when the hard thing finally arrives, they simply go quiet and let it land on someone else. I'll figure out the money, he said eventually. Give me some time. You have 30 days. That's not me being cruel, that's just what the letter says. He hung up without saying goodbye, which somehow hurt more than if he'd yelled. In the meantime, I kept working. That part surprised people when I've told this story in person. The fact that life doesn't actually pause for you just because your family has shown you exactly where you stand. I had 2 client presentations that week, a product launch to consult on, a Thursday deadline that didn't care that I'd spent Friday night crying in a rental car outside a restaurant with my name, literally in its title. I remember sitting in a conference room in Seattle, nodding along to a roadmap discussion, while some part of my brain kept replaying Corinne's clipboard, the flicker in her face, my father refilling a stranger's champagne glass instead of looking at me. I've learned that grief doesn't wait for a convenient moment. It just shows up during roadmap meetings and asks to be felt anyway. My friend Priya, who I've known since college and who has exactly 0 patience for family dysfunction dressed up as tradition, took me to dinner that Thursday. I told her the whole thing, the LLC, the demand letter, Elise's advice. You know this isn't really about the money, she said, twirling her fork through a plate of noodles. I know. It's about the fact that you built your entire relationship with your dad around being useful. And the second you stopped being quietly useful and started being inconveniently visible, they didn't know what to do with you. I didn't say anything for a while. She wasn't wrong. I'd spent 20 years translating love into logistics. Showing up, fixing things, wiring money, smoothing over Corinne's coldness with extra effort, as if enough effort could eventually earn a stepmother's resentment. It never occurred to me, until that sidewalk, that the effort itself might be the thing keeping me small in that family's eyes. The useful daughter doesn't get seated at the table. She gets handed a clipboard schedule and told capacity's full. So what happens now? Priya asked. Now I stop being useful and start being clear, I said. I hadn't planned to say it that way, but once it was out of my mouth, it felt like the truest sentence I'd said in months. Word moves fast in a town with 1 real restaurant strip and 1 real church parking lot for gossip. Within 2 weeks, my Aunt Bernadette, my father's older sister, a retired postal worker who has never once in her life kept an opinion to herself, called me directly. I heard you got turned away at the door like a caterer, she said. Is that true? I told her everything: the reopening, Corinne's clipboard, the LLC, the demand letter. Bernadette went quiet in the specific way she does right before she decides to do something about a thing. Your father built that restaurant with your mother's insurance money after the accident, you know? She said. Before Corinne. You were the reason he kept it open all those years he was raising you alone. And now that woman's put her son's names on it and yours isn't even there. I know. Bernadette, I'm gonna have a word with him. I didn't ask her to. But 2 days later, she went into the restaurant during a slow Tuesday lunch and reportedly told my father, in front of 2 of his line cooks, that he ought to be ashamed of himself, and that if her late sister, my mother, could see what he'd let happen at that door, she'd have walked in and taken the whole restaurant back with her bare hands. My father didn't call to complain about that conversation. He didn't call at all for another week. When he finally did, it wasn't about the money. I want to add your name back to the LLC, he said. Corinne doesn't agree, but it's my restaurant. I opened it, I can make that call. Dade, I don't need my name on a deed to feel like your daughter. I needed you to say something at a door. I know. A long pause. I've been a coward about a lot of things for a long time. Not just that night. It wasn't a full accounting. It wasn't the conversation where he explained why, for 6 years, he'd let Corinne slowly edit me out of the story of his own life, until I was a wire transfer instead of a daughter. But it was the first time he'd used the word coward about himself, instead of waiting for someone else to say it. And I'd learned enough in therapy over the past 2 years to know that admissions like that don't usually arrive all at once. They arrive in installments, if they arrive at all. I'm not asking for equity, I said. I'm asking to be repaid on the schedule my lawyer sent. And I'm asking you to think hard about whether you actually want a relationship with me, or whether you want the version of a relationship that only shows up when there's a wire transfer involved. I want the real one, he said. I don't know if I know how anymore. But I want it. I told him that was a start. I didn't tell him it fixed anything because it didn't. 2 months later, he'd repaid $18,000 of the $60,000, on time, through a separate personal account Corinne apparently didn't know existed until the withdrawals started. I hear, through Bernadette, that this has become its own quiet argument in that house, one I am no longer inside of, and have no intention of ever climbing back into. Dax texted me once, weeks after the reopening, a message that read less like an apology and more like a business update. Hey, sorry about the whole vibe at the opening. My mom can be intense about guest lists lol. We should grab coffee sometime and talk about the restaurant's Instagram strategy. I feel like there's a story angle with you being the original daughter that could be good for engagement. I read that twice. Felt nothing but a kind of flat, distant amusement and did not reply. Some doors don't need a formal closing. They just stop being doors you think about. Corinne has never called to apologize. Bernadette says she refers to the whole episode as Renata's lawyer face, the same way I imagine some people refer to hurricanes as weather. I don't hate my father. I've done enough work in the last 2 years to know that hating him would just be another version of orbiting him. Another way of making his choices the center of my life. He's a man who spent 30 years avoiding hard conversations and found, eventually, a wife who was extremely good at helping him keep avoiding them. That's not an excuse. It's just what happened, and I've stopped needing it to be a bigger story than that. What I do have now is something I didn't have in April. I have a name on a repayment schedule instead of a vague promise. I have a therapist who's helped me understand that the impulse to fund people's crises quietly, without asking for anything in return, wasn't generosity so much as an old, exhausted hope that if I gave enough, someone would finally choose me back without my having to ask. I have a framed photo on my own kitchen wall in Seattle, not the sage green apron photo, a different one. An old faded one my aunt found and mailed me, of my father and me standing in the original dining room the week it opened, before Corinne, before the twins, before any of it, just the 2 of us in aprons that didn't match anything, grinning like the whole thing was ours. It was ours once. I'm still deciding what it gets to be now. Here's what I want to leave you with. Because I think it matters more than the specific number, more than the restaurant, more than any single family. A boundary isn't the moment you stop loving someone. It's the moment you stop financing a version of their love that was never actually available to you in the first place. I didn't send that demand letter because I wanted to punish my father. I sent it because I finally understood that hoping quietly, for years, had cost me far more than $60,000 ever could. If you've ever paid, waited, and shown up for people who couldn't be bothered to hold the door, I see you. And if you're currently deciding whether to keep doing that, I hope this helped you decide a little faster than it took me. I'd genuinely love to know. If you were in my position that night on the sidewalk, would you have handed over the wine and walked away quietly, or would you have said something right there at the door? Tell me, walked, or spoke up in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story landed for you, subscribe. I've got more like it coming about the quiet, unglamorous work of finally choosing yourself. I'll see you in the next one.